Welcome to Conversation with Friends. My name is R.O. Smith, and this morning we have the privilege of talking with Aixa Willoughby and Christian Moore, and they are part of our new young adult ministry, which we're going to be hearing more about later, but we want to get to know the people behind the ministry here. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about your faith background. Like, how did you come to know Christ? I mean, you can get as in-depth or crazy as you want, or...
Yeah, so I was kind of raised Catholic by my grandparents. I grew up with my grandparents. We would go to Mass every so often, maybe once a month. They would always want us to go all the time, but we never did. I went to CCD, never really understood. Catholic, I don't know what it stands for.
Okay.
It's like Catholic school.
Okay.
But I would go after school every Monday, and I did that for like 4 years or something like that, and that's like a whole program. But I just went because I was forced to, so I don't really like know God. And then I used to go to Dana Middle School, and we would walk over to this lawn right across the street from the Point Loma Library and the church. And one day I got invited to go to the youth group, and a guy named Justin was running the youth group, and he was awesome and invited me, and that's kind of when I got to get connected with the church. Still didn't really know Christ or God, and then a couple years later, after Delaire took over the youth ministry, I went to a winter camp, and through that whole season of my life and everything that was kind of going on during a winter camp, I decided to devote my life to Christ, and some crazy things happened, and just really cool God moments of God saying, like, I got you, I'm here for you, and that was sophomore year of high school, so it was really cool.
Nice. Aixa.
Yeah, so I'm a military brat, moved around a lot growing up. Sometimes went to church, sometimes we didn't, sometimes I'd go with friends, sometimes I wouldn't.
Was your family religious, or would they call themselves religious?
Yeah, I'm half Puerto Rican, and so that side of my right. Is definitely, like many Latin cultures, very traditionally religious.
Right.
So I was baptized as a baby, and I have a godmother and a godfather, but we didn't really talk about God in the household. We didn't, pray and things like that very much.
It was just sort of like a private, assumed religion.
Yeah, exactly. And so I did go to a couple of religious schools as well, but it was more, that's the best school in the area that we can afford, that's what we're going to do, and much less this is what we want for you. When I was in high school, my mom started going to church and had a relationship with God in a new way, but it wasn't until I left and came back from college that I really decided, oh no, this is something I really want, and I was going to church on my own accord, really motivated. And honestly, for me...
What was it that kind of pushed you to that?
Yeah. When I moved back to San Diego, none of my plans happened at all. I wanted to go to school, get a bachelor's degree in environmental science. None of my credits transferred. I was going to move in with my best friend at the time. That ended up falling apart. So all of these things just weren't lining up, and I got super, super down. And I was like, you know what? My mom seems to have a good time here. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to sit there and why not? And honestly, it wasn't until really just plugging into community at a church and getting to see, I think for me personally, God speaks loudest through other people. And it was just really special. The people that I met, it didn't feel coincidental. And so that was really cool. And even looking back on my life from that standpoint, after saying yes to Jesus sort of thing, being able to see all these different people that definitely kind of had a hand in my life. And it wasn't until that moment that I was able to say, oh my goodness, that's so cool that even though I had really no idea who God was, it's so clear to me to be able to see that he had my back through it all.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you kind of alluded to this, but that you were a lawn kid, is what they call you, right?
Yeah.
Good
old lawn kid.
I was gonna say, I guess, how did you find the red brick? So you kind of alluded to that. I don't know if you want to expand on that anymore, but it sounds like they found you too. So.
Totally. Yeah. Free pizza goes a long way.
All right.
Free pizza and games and yeah, lawn kid. Just to talk on that, just a sec. There was just a group of us that all come from troubled backgrounds and just kind of people were just kind of sketchy over at the lawn, so we didn't have a home, and that was what the youth group was for a lot of us, was a place just every Thursday we could come to. We'd play games, we'd wrestle, we'd get really crazy, but it's what we all needed. We needed that outlet. We needed somewhere to go. Some of us literally needed the food that they provided. So it was a really cool place to be welcomed in, and that's kind of how I started. And
so we have obviously YMCA that kind of meets there, and those kids come, and they probably come for the same reason, food and games, hangout. But what would keep them here, or what kept you coming back? When Delaire or whoever said come to youth group, what made you go okay, or rather than just nope, I'm here for the pizza?
That's a good question, because there was a couple of times where I was I'm not going to stay here. As a kid, you just kind of do whatever you want. But what kept coming me back were the people and the relationships I built. Honestly, the first time that an adult decided to take interest in me and support me and through what I was going through. I grew up without my dad. My mom was in and out of my life and ended up doing drugs when I was in high school. And so the first time that anybody really took a moment to say hey, how are you? Oh, you're doing bad. Let's talk about that. Let me care for you. Was Justin and then Delaire. And that's what brought me, is I needed love. I needed support. And it was just so cool to see that come from a church, because I would have never guessed that. And really, it wasn't even about the church. It was they didn't do that because, we're a church, we need to do that, reach this amount of kids who have troubled backgrounds. It was just hey, you're a cool kid, let me invest in you. And that's what kept me. And all the friends throughout Brick, I still keep in touch with some of them. And Delaire, we just went to Texas and visited him. Very beautiful relationship came through that. So I really think it was the intentionality and the relationships that the youth group built, which was just beautiful. Definitely God sent.
That's awesome. Now I know how you got here, but they do not. How did you get here?
Yeah. So short answer is because of Christian.
Oh, why? That's weird.
We started dating.
Oh, there it is. There's the reveal.
But kind of bigger picture, longer answer. Had been going to this church for a couple of years now, and just kind of...
Not this one, another one. Right.
Correct,
right.
A different church. And for lack of a better term, felt like I kind of outgrew it a little bit. Their demographic is the new believer, and I think they do that very, very well. And I just got to a point in my faith journey where I was seeking a little more, and so just really hadn't been going to a church for almost a year before I met Christian, and would kind of serve on certain teams and things like that. I do have experience working with young adult ministry in that church, but met Christian, and he was very stoked on this place, and was honestly, this is my family. This is where, they've been with me through thick and thin. I've left and come back, and I was okay, you're pretty cool. This sounds pretty cool. Maybe I'll check it out. And honestly, we were just laughing the other day, because the first time I came to church without him, I remember being really nervous. And I was I don't want people, I don't want people to just think I come because you're here and they're going to ask me about you and not really care that I'm here. And I could not have been more wrong. Got awesome. Here immediately, people, asking and saying how excited they are to see me still and things like that. And yeah, I really do truly feel like this is my church too. I don't just come because my boyfriend also happens to come. So that's been really special.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. So, so I noticed that you guys tend to invite people. We've kind of, in the cafe service, for those of you that don't know, in the cafe service is our contemporary service that happens at 10:30 in our chapel on Sunday mornings. And so we had very few young adults, and then they started coming, and it feels like we've got a little posse now over there. And so it seems like, and obviously it's not just you guys, but it seems like there's this kind of invitation culture, and I know you guys have invited people. When you tell people about this church, what do you say? What do you tell them about this place?
Yeah, I think community is a really big deal for me, and so I think in a lot of areas of my life, if there's something I'm really enjoying or loving, I want to bring my people into it. And this church is definitely one of those things. I think the great thing about this church and what's so special is people notice you, and when you walk in, that they're saying hello. But I've never, on the other side of that, I've never felt like judgment in that. There's been, sometimes when you go to a smaller church, it's kind of like, oh, I noticed you didn't show up last week, and
Right.
you're like, ah.
Right.
And so it's just this like genuine care, genuinely like, I'm so happy you're here. And yeah, and I get that across the board from people that I don't even super know that well yet, and so it's really great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this church is really interesting because I think bringing like the newcomer to this church is a little bit of an uphill battle because of the community and how tight they are and we are and how small
like a newcomer to faith or a newcomer just
I think
like a new person?
Either or. I think both. I think definitely for a newcomer to faith, I think they could I think one thing we do really well at the church here at PLCPC is dig deeper and ask those questions that challenge your thought or the capital C church's thought, or just like get deeper than just the surface level faith. And if you don't have a faith, that's hard to feel like you have input or value. And then if you do have a faith and you're coming on, you see all these people who know everyone by each other's names and everything. So one thing that I think is really important to talk about is the opportunity for community and relationships is so large here. And I think that's one thing that it is the reason why we want to invest a little bit more into this church, is because we know that if you invest more, you're going to get more, because there's just so much enrichment here, and there's so many people who know so much or have connections or just have crazy awesome stories that if you spend the time to invest in, you're going to get something of. And I think when we go to invite people, that's what we want to target. Is like, hey, are you looking to either start a faith or, develop your faith or even just come to build relationships? And I think that's one thing that we both really want to focus on, is just creating a welcome space. You know, if you don't want to sit and have a 30-minute, discussion about a psalm, like, that's fine. Let's go bowling, or let's go just have cool community, and then those conversations will happen. And I think that's really, at least for me, that's where my faith stemmed from, was, again, that youth group wasn't come listen to our youth leaders preach at you for 45 minutes. It was, let's go have pizza, let's get Slurpees, let's wrestle, let's do that. And I want to take that into my life, into my faith, and say, let's just hang out, and those conversations, those relationships that God will feed into, it's going to come.
It's interesting. It's like the things that you said, the things that you put in, when you put in, you get out of it, and it's like, but sometimes when you come into the community, it's hard to get past that threshold, because everybody else seems to already kind of be in. So it's like, and it's not that we're not welcoming, but it's almost like, because we know each other so well, it's like you seem unwelcome. You're unconsciously unwelcoming. So that's a good reminder for us to make sure that we're always kind of keeping our eye out.
And definitely, we are not an unwelcoming church.
Totally. No, I'm not saying we are, but it's
like there are so many people that just like, oh my gosh, you're new. Like, let me just welcome you. But there is just that threshold that just makes it. It's just a couple steps that you got to step up, and some people might not want to or be ready for that, and that's okay.
Right.
But yeah.
So just keep inviting, right?
Yeah.
So
that's all we can do.
So when you think about like your generation as like your young adults, how old are you guys, just so they know?
25.
And I'm 26.
Okay, so what would you say are the greatest needs for like your age demographic today?
I think the hard thing with this age
I know that's a huge
demographic
question,
is
by the way,
it's so diverse. And for sure you see that in really any age, because everyone does life differently. But if you kind of generalize this age, you have people in college, you have people that just barely moved out for the first time, you have people that are starting families and getting married and having kids, or 2 kids or 3 kids, and so it's really interesting. Like, yes, you have this like commonality of your age, but that can be so different for so many people, and so I think that's really, it's kind of like greatest strength, greatest weakness at the same time, because on the one side, I feel like diversity for the win and is always the best, but on the other side, it's making sure that you're able to service all those different types of life stages.
Right.
Yeah, I think for me the way that I've kind of thought about it is totally like 18 to 22 so different from 22 to 26,
Totally.
which is so different from 26 to 30.
Right.
And even 22 to 30 you could be getting married, you could be having kids, you could be, you know, all sorts of different things. But all in all, with this age group, 18 to 30, I would really say like is so fast paced because you're trying to figure everything out, and you're trying to make all the right decisions, get the right job, you know, get the right relationship, all these things that you're trying so hard to set up, because if you right now in our society we've set up, if you don't have these things set up now, you're failing, and that's really hard to deal with. I'm wrestling with that myself. And so I think for our age group, one thing that I could say that is just that I would assume is a big need is just a support system, but more so I would like to use the term like a landing spot, like a crash pad. Like we're climbers, so I'm gonna use that term, crash pad, of like somewhere where if you're struggling or you're gonna fall, like somewhere where you can safely land and come to, and just know that we're here for you, we can support you, and I think that's really great to have other young adults to come support you. But I think what's really awesome and what's really beautiful about this church is the generations above us, you know, the mid adults, the elder, so many different types of people are here. People have families, people have grandkids, people, you know, all sorts of different walks of life are here. Really, we're just missing that young adult. Like that's the one thing that we've noticed is that young adult portion is missing.
Right.
But we have so much other support systems everywhere else that we could use. And so I think that's what we want to create, is that space for us to come gather and then utilize those resources that we already have.
Yeah. Why do you think we don't have that young adult age? I mean, what would be your, as you examine it, is it because of the you know, community aspect of it is so thick, or because we're not like flashy or whatever, what do young adults want? I don't even know if that's what they want, but
I think for me, I think I have an interesting perspective, because I've come from being 13 and kind of seen like so many, like all my volunteers that volunteered for youth group never really went to church. All of my age group, they no longer come to break, and if they do, it's very rare. You know, I see people that I went to high school with every once in a while, but they're not a part of the community as much anymore. And I think one thing, I think there's two things. I think leadership, I think that it just needs to be somebody to come and take that on. And I think from what I've seen being a part of the youth ministry, and I've seen the preschool, I've seen all these our bigger ministries that we pour a lot of resources and time into. We just haven't had somebody to say, okay, I'm ready to take this up, because everyone else is kind of being pulled in other awesome directions. And that's totally fine. I just don't think there's been that person to say, okay, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to run with it. I also think to piggyback off that, it's just the resource allocation. Again, we put so much resources into our preschool is phenomenal. You know, our high school and middle school ministries are awesome. Like our adult ministries are really, really great. I don't believe we've really tried to or put the time into putting resources into a young adult ministry. And I just think right now is the perfect time. I don't think it's flashy. I don't think it's like we don't have something. I think one thing that we've talked about doing is getting a young adult ministry, and then having like that pool of people help with the youth ministry, and like create the symbiotic relationship, and then again like into adult ministry. So just kind of creating that bridge to that gap. But right now we have really great programs until 18, then we have really great ministries at like 35 and up, and I think bridging that gap is going to be really awesome. And I also think a portion of that is because of like I said, how busy we are. It's really hard for somebody that's going to Point Loma Nazarene or somewhere else and say, oh yeah, out of the 5 hours that I have free in my week, I'm going to go spend an hour at church that I don't really know. And so it's going to take that time to show people that it's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, it's even interesting. Sorry, it was interesting that you said like you noticed that your leaders didn't really even go to church. It was just kind of like their church was like the youth ministry, really, or whatever, or they figured it out somewhere else. And it's kind of like, how do we not that getting them into the church is the goal, but how do we integrate them into a greater, more like profound and like greater breadth of a body, rather than just kind of like my little cloistered.
Totally. I think that was the hard part, right? Was we had this. I think from my youth ministry, like when I was a kid, it was like we were kind of our own little bubble.
Yeah.
And we had our own volunteers, and we were kind of us, and we were flourishing. But then the rest of the church didn't really know or see that. And so and now I think it's kind of gone the opposite way of our youth ministry. It doesn't have a lot of young adult volunteers, but they are super involved in the church now. Right. So it's like, how do we do that well together? I think the answer is creating a young adult ministry that's specific to pour into the young adults, not just young adults pouring into the youth ministry.
Right. And most of the time we think, whatever they learn in youth group, eventually they'll come back. Well, this generation or the younger generations aren't coming back like the older generations did. So interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, part of what you're saying, like the leadership aspect, and I don't want this to sound like it's Christian and I, and because we're here, like we're here to save the day. Like literally, I know both of us can name tons of people that have stepped up in leadership to help us do this. We just got asked to do the interview, like it's not.
You're the face, right? Yeah. You're the face, but we really don't know what we're doing.
And I think we have such a solid crew, and it's really fun because we just all really enjoy each other's company, and we have a lot of fun. And I think there's so much potential to grow from that because representation is really important. And so when someone that's never come here before sees a group of young adults sitting together, that's a lot easier of a gap to kind of like, I see myself in them. I see that they belong here. Like, I'm in, and I think you kind of mentioned earlier, like people feeling like they have a role to play and that they can help the community. And I think that's something that will be really important for us to make sure in, doing this ministry is it's not this like cool kid club that sits at the front of church, know. That's something like I'm super passionate about. Like I said earlier, like I moved around a lot growing up. I didn't always make friends fast. And so, making sure that we're including everybody, to the introvert that just wants to be the fly on the wall, to the extrovert that wants to, to the creative that wants to draw a mural, and just kind of finding that pace. And I think that's going to be the really important thing in all of this, is just kind of, having that leadership in place, having people, again, not just us, like a good core crew that's going to, be there and be willing to come again and again and again and help when help is needed, and really just making sure to be open and inviting.
That's awesome.
And if I can figure off that real quick, I think like what you talked about with having the like core people, I think that's one thing that I think is just like God-given right now. Is this is a really great opportunity. Is we have a couple people from the generation before me that went to youth group that are still in part of this church. We have people that were volunteers, for the last 6 years that are coming back and or on staff, or there's just these people that have decided to show up at the right time, and we love hanging out with each other. And we don't set up for us to all just hang out after church in the sanctuary or the chapel, but every Sunday we're there for at least half an hour just talking and hanging out with each other. And I think that has something to do with just natural growth and beauty that comes from this church, and now it's just time to pour resources into it, in my opinion.
So what does knowing your generation and knowing this church, and we are an older church, obviously, but knowing your generation, what does this church have to offer 25, 26, 18 to 30-year-olds? Let's go with that.
Yeah, I think one thing for sure is mentorship. I think is super, super there. I live with John Brand, as many of you guys know, and I have conversations with him, and I ask, I'm looking for work right now. So like, what does your work life look like, and how do I exacerbate the resources to find work, and how do you know what you're doing is right? And questions like that are really important for our generation to learn from the generation before us. And there's just so much of that. And I think that one thing that I've seen from this church is sometimes it's hard to pull from that. It's hard to get those people that know things or have something that would be really nice to use or something like that. And so, I definitely think that that's something that we could use is like, whether it's like a job board or if someone's renting a room or, anything like that young adults might need, or even just advice or mentorship, or, whether it's tangible things or intangible things. I think there's just so much that we could gain from relationships with. And I think that at the same point, I think we have a lot to give in new hindsight and even just physical labor, if that's what they need, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. Statistically, a young adult is more likely to stay at a church if they're able to connect to someone not their own age, but someone older than them. And I think, it's a little bit easier. I don't want to say it's easy because it is hard to make friends as an adult, period. But it's a little bit easier to find friends of your own age. It's not that easy to find that mentorship. And I think even, you can go to a networking event and you might find a mentor in your career. You're not necessarily going to find like a mentor in life or someone that might like share your same faith. And I think that's really special and has definitely been really helpful for me coming to this church. And so I definitely think that is the biggest thing. That it's funny because it's like people joke about it a lot that this church is such an old church, but I think that's such a good thing. And I've seen time and time again that it's not, an old church that's like set in their ways and they're not going to change and our way is the right way. Yeah. We're an old church, we've lived life, but, we're ready to hear you guys out because, like Christian said, we also have new ideas and new perspectives. Right. And I've definitely felt like those have been received really well, which is cool.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I think, when people think old church, they think, staunch, kind of like, you can't do it this way or the highway. But we're old in age, but like in spirit, we're always wanting to learn and grow. And that's like, I don't know if that's just from our leadership or just that's how the people are wired, but that's a cool like.
And I think that's going to be super important for us to feel like we matter and that we're a part of the church. Again, not creating that group that's just, they're the young adults again. It's like, no, we're Point Loma Community Church as well, and I think that'll be really important. But just even the feedback from Pancake Breakfast and what we're doing this Sunday, and signed us up right away. And they're like, this is a great idea. Just things like that makes us feel like we're welcomed. And I think that hopefully that will transpire into new people and new young adults and this hopefully thriving ministry that will happen.
Yeah, they always say look for where the Spirit's moving and go there. And so it just feels like it's kind of fun to see, like, wait, is there something going on? Oh, there's something going on here. Like, we've been kind of talking about this, and now it's actually, what you said earlier, all this kind of confluence of events and people and just in the right place. And maybe, let's get into it and maybe see what God has to say. So, well, thank you guys for joining us this morning. It was so good to hear your stories and hear what, the hope and the passion that you have for the young adult and to be part of this church. And between you Sunday and this conversation, we're pumped up. We're excited. So, and thank you guys for joining us this morning on Conversation with Friends. You found yourself on YouTube here, so go ahead and like and subscribe our page if you have not already, and ring the bell because that's what the cool kids do to get notifications about future things that are on this site. And you can also, if you're a young adult, on the banner below, you can see the email if you want to know more information about our young adult ministry and get hooked up with these two, and they can tell you about all the fun stuff that they're doing. If you're not a young adult, that's all right. You can go to our website at pointlomachurch.org and find out all the things that are going on. But thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.